The Krill Dominion did not measure its power in ships, but in years. For thousands of years, the Krill had moved through the galaxy, never meeting a species that could truly challenge them. They were not cruel, but they were absolute. Every world they found was either useful for its minerals and workers, or irrelevant and left alone. They believed that they had already mapped and understood all forms of life. Because of this long history of total victory and control, the Krill were not fearful. They were simply tired of winning. Their civilization was a machine of cold, quiet calculation. Emotions were inefficient. Chaos was an error. War was a matter of logistics, not passion. To the Krill High Council, a conflict was nothing more than a simple equation to solve, and the answer was always Krill superiority. Captain Klar sat on the bridge of the scout ship, Harbinger. His ship was far from the main routes, exploring a newly charted area of space that the Krill knew to be mostly empty. Klar's role was routine, almost boring. Then, the sensors found something truly strange, a solar system bursting with life. They named the third planet Earth. From the Krill's perspective, Earth was a mess. It was covered in vast oceans, thick forests, and endless complicated weather patterns. The dominant species, which the Krill called humans, were even more baffling. They spoke thousands of different languages on one small planet. They dedicated massive resources to things the Krill considered wasteful, like art, music, and competitive sports. They built giant cities, only to fight wars among themselves, destroying what they built. They were illogical and chaotic, driven by too much emotion. Klar filed a preliminary report that noted the humans' strange complexity. He wrote that they had no central government, no unified galactic defense grid, and no real understanding of the galaxy outside their own sun. Their most advanced weapons were primitive when compared to a basic Krill patrol drone. Klar concluded that taking the planet would be a simple formality. It would be a compliance phase, requiring minimal ships and very few resources. The Krill High Council read the details about human complexity and emotion with mild irritation. Why would a species make things so difficult for themselves? They dismissed the planet's problems as nothing more than minor clutter. The conquest was approved instantly. The orders were simple: prepare the initial show of force and begin the compliance phase. To the Krill, fear was the expected and correct response from a lower species. They assumed the humans would see their first probe, panic, and immediately surrender. Meanwhile, on Earth, the vast scale of the coming threat was completely missed. Alex was a military analyst. He worked in a small, quiet facility near the coast, deep underground. His job was to watch the empty spaces between the planets, looking for anything that might threaten them. Most of what he found was simple dust, old satellites, or small, harmless rocks. He liked the quiet work. It was predictable. He had been watching the screens for 12 hours when the energy signature appeared. It was persistent, non-natural, and unlike anything he had ever seen. It was too stable to be debris, but too faint and strange to be a normal ship. It was sitting just outside the orbit of Pluto, lurking in the dark. Alex checked his equipment. He ran the detection sequence 3 times. He even swapped out the sensor core, thinking there was a flaw in the wiring. Every time the same faint, stubborn reading returned, a steady, cold presence that seemed to be watching. He flagged the concern, giving it a low priority. He sent a brief technical summary to his superiors, saying it was possibly a rare, persistent electromagnetic anomaly. No one was overly concerned. It was just a small, strange dot on a screen, easily mistaken for a glitch. Alex sighed, rubbed his tired eyes, and tried to ignore the subtle nagging feeling that the space outside their solar system was no longer empty. The vast, arrogant Krill Dominion was moving, and the first piece of their calculating machine was already in place.
The Krill High Council moved quickly.
They believed the presence of their scout ship, Harbinger, had already done the difficult work of finding Earth. Now it was time for the easy part, enforcing compliance. They dispatched an advanced observation probe called the Whisper. It was small, heavily shielded, and cloaked in a powerful stealth field that made it invisible to all known galactic sensors. To the Krill, this probe was silent and ghost-like, a perfect tool for watching a primitive world. The Krill were certain nothing could detect it. The Whisper's task was simple: glide into Earth's orbit, passively listen to human communications, map all military bases, and record the locations of power grids. Once the data was complete, the probe would transmit a coded message, an ultimatum demanding immediate surrender to the Dominion. The Krill fully expected the humans' fear would do the rest. Back on Earth, Alex was still staring at the faint, persistent anomaly outside Pluto. His report had been filed away under minor sensor glitch. He felt isolated, staring at a truth no one else acknowledged. He knew the simple dot was hostile, but he needed proof that could convince the world. He remembered a contact he had made months ago. Chloe, a brilliant young astrophysicist working out of a university lab in Nevada. She was working on a project that many considered theoretical nonsense, a quantum radar system. It wasn't designed to detect metal or heat like old radar. Instead, it was designed to detect the smallest, almost undetectable shifts in the fabric of space itself. Chloe's theory was that nothing could move in reality without leaving a ripple, no matter how clever the camouflage. Alex contacted Chloe, sending her the raw data from his facility. He called it a ghost signature. Chloe was immediately intrigued. Her lab was small and messy, filled with monitors showing complicated equations and blinking experimental devices. She had been close to abandoning the project, but Alex's numbers matched her theoretical model perfectly. "It's not a ship, Alex," she told him over the secured line, her voice tight with excitement and alarm. "It's a void. Whatever they're using to hide, it's warping the space around it, and that warp is what we are seeing. Their stealth is useless against this kind of detection." The ghost signature, which they now understood to be the Whisper probe, was moving closer, slowly but deliberately. It was now within the solar system, making its final approach to Earth. Alex and Chloe realized that the object was not observing them, it was cataloging them, gathering data for a planned attack. The Krill High Council, waiting patiently for the probe's final report, grew impatient. The delay was unacceptable. They decided to perform a minor, controlled demonstration to quicken the process. The Krill believed a brief, non-lethal shock was all that was needed. They ordered the Whisper probe to unleash a massive electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, over a remote, unpopulated desert area on Earth. The pulse would briefly shut down communications and power in a large region, showing the humans that they were completely exposed and vulnerable. It was a simple, psychological tool designed to trigger instant surrender. But Alex and Chloe were already working together. They knew the moment the probe would initiate its show of force because Chloe's quantum field had been subtly monitoring the object's power levels. They correctly guessed that the Krill would use a non-lethal weapon first, expecting the humans to simply break. They rushed to connect their sensitive quantum sensor to an abandoned massive communications array in that very same desert region.
"We can't stop the EMP," Alex said, his fingers flying across the interface, trying to patch in the array's ancient systems. "The Krill energy signature is huge," Chloe replied, her eyes wide with focus. "If we catch that wave and filter it through the array, we can turn our quantum field into a weapon. We can blast back." The Krill whisper fired. A silent, invisible wave of energy spread out, intending to paralyze the region. Human power grids failed, lights flickered out, and communications dropped. For a moment, the Krill celebrated the expected silence. But before the EMP wave fully dissipated, the old communications array, now driven by Chloe's adapted quantum filtering system, fired back. It wasn't a military beam or a laser. It was a massive, blinding spike of energy that perfectly countered the Whisper's complex stealth field by overloading its delicate warp generators. The Krill probe was rocked violently. Its main stealth components exploded, sparking and dying. The Whisper was no longer a ghost. It was just a ship, suddenly visible on every human radar system, broadcasting its panic to space. Captain Clark, monitoring the probe's status from the distant Harbinger, was stunned. The counterattack was technologically crude, a messy mix of human and reverse-engineered concepts. But the timing was surgical and precise. The humans had not just defended, they had adapted the Krill's own attack and turned it into an instant countermeasure. The high and mighty Whisper was now a crippled, brightly visible piece of junk, limping in Earth's orbit. "Captain Clark to High Council," the captain reported, his voice flat with surprise. "The compliance phase is delayed. The indigenous species is displaying an alarming and illogical capacity for rapid technical adaptation. They have disabled the probe's primary function and revealed its location, requesting immediate dispatch of a deterrent vessel." For the first time in millennia, the Krill High Council did not know the correct answer to the equation. The expected fear had not happened. Instead, the small, chaotic planet had only responded with ingenuity and a defiant technological counterpunch. Their perfect plan was already broken by a species they had dismissed as merely cluttered.
The report from Captain Clark was the subject of much debate in the Krill High Council. The failure of the Whisper probe was not just a failure of technology, it was a failure of prediction. The Krill were not used to being surprised. They were never supposed to be surprised by a species that still used chemical-based propulsion for space travel. The Krill leaders gathered in their silent, cold chambers. Their mood had shifted from mild annoyance to something colder and more focused. Genuine confusion. "They did not surrender," stated the lead council member, its voice a low, steady sound. "They used our own attack to hurt our probe. This shows capacity for quick thinking." "It shows a dangerous lack of sense," another Krill argued. "They wasted a huge amount of energy to destroy a small, unarmed object. This is inefficient behavior. We must correct it." They decided the time for passive observation was over. They would send a clear, undeniable show of force. They would dispatch the Vigilance, a mid-sized cruiser known for its heavy shields and focused firepower. The ship was tasked with moving into Earth's orbit, disabling any communication satellites, and waiting for the humans to admit defeat. This would be a quick, decisive action to put the chaotic planet back in its place. The Krill still believed this was just a defensive fluke, a small, lucky event that would not happen again. The Vigilance was terrifying. It was a long, dark spear of a ship, covered in thick plating that could withstand hits from planetary defenses 100 times stronger than Earth's. As it crossed the solar system, it sent out a powerful energy wash that swept away small debris and cleared its path. On Earth, the news of the incoming vessel spread like a shockwave. Alex and Chloe, suddenly famous, were now at the center of a rapidly built global defense unit. They looked at the data feed showing the massive Krill cruiser coming closer, and their hearts sank. "It's huge," Alex whispered, looking at the energy readings. "Our entire nuclear arsenal wouldn't scratch its paint. Its shields are just too powerful." "We can't fight power with power," Chloe said, running her hands through her messy hair. "We have to fight order with chaos. The Krill only know how to fight what they can predict. They expect us to use straight lines and simple math." They realized the Krill had no way to understand human unpredictability. They needed a distraction, something reckless and impossible. They needed pilots who were not afraid to lose their lives for the smallest chance of a win. This is where Ben came in. Ben was an older man, a retired fighter pilot known for taking risks that terrified his own superiors. He led a small group of pilots who flew heavily modified fighter jets, planes that were fast but fragile. They were not space fighters. They were meant to fly in Earth's air. But they were all the humans had. Alex, Chloe, and Ben met in a frantic, hurried conference call. The cruiser has a central sensor array at the back of its main hull. It uses it to track high-speed objects. If we can damage that, even a little, the ship will be blind for a few minutes. It might retreat for repairs. "Damage a little?" Ben scoffed, running a hand over his thick mustache. "We'd have to fly right through their shield's energy overflow. That's a one-way trip, kid." "Yes," Alex confirmed, his voice heavy. "But if we don't, it's game over." Ben did not hesitate. He looked at his small crew, 5 pilots who knew the risk, and simply nodded. They were going to fight a starship with old airplanes. The Vigilance reached a stable orbit and prepared to assert its dominance. It activated its main weapon system, charging up for a pulse that would completely cripple Earth's communication infrastructure. Then 5 small, fast dots launched from Earth, speeding toward the massive Krill cruiser. Ben led the charge. The Krill cruiser was ready for a volley of missiles or an organized fleet attack. It was not ready for Ben's flying. Ben and his team flew in completely erratic, crazy patterns. They used cheap explosive decoys that flew sideways and backward, confusing the Krill's advanced target systems. The Krill commander, used to elegant and logical combat, was deeply annoyed by the frantic buzzing movement of the human planes. As the Vigilance fired a few energy blasts that missed wildly, Ben saw his opening. The cruiser was venting excess energy from its massive shield generators, a necessary part of his defensive cycle. Ben flew his aging jet directly into the bright exhaust plume. His jet was ripped apart by the heat and energy, but just before the plane broke completely, Ben launched a cluster of small, custom-made missiles. They were not powerful enough to pierce the main hull, but the explosion happened right in the chaotic high-energy zone near the ship's rear. The combined energy overload was too much for the nearby sensor array. The Vigilance shuddered. Its main sensor, the part that let it see and track fast, small objects, went dark. The Krill commander immediately felt panic. He could still fight, but he was temporarily blind to the messy, close-range attacks the humans had used. The Krill commander's logs recorded a chilling observation. They calculate with zero regard for loss. They simply use their own lives as a weapon to inflict the smallest wound. They do not calculate loss. They simply do not stop. The Krill commander made a quick, tactical decision. The small damage was not worth the exposure to this bizarre, self-destructive enemy. The Vigilance ceased its attack, pulled up its shields, and began a slow, immediate retreat toward the outer system for repairs. Earth watched in shock as the giant, terrifying Krill warship turned and ran. The humans had not won the war, but they had won the first battle. They had shown the Krill that they were a species that defied all logic, and that was the first thing the Krill had ever truly feared.
The retreat of the Vigilance was an insult the Krill Dominion could not accept.
For the first time in their long history, the High Council had to admit that a species was not following the predictable rules of conflict. They stopped calling it a compliance phase. This was war. They would not send another single ship. They would send a full invasion force. They still believed that enough force and logic would win the day. The invasion force was composed of thousands of ground soldiers and massive transport ships that darkened the sky as they entered the atmosphere. The Krill soldiers were perfectly trained, encased in thick, dark armor that made them look like walking fortresses. They were designed for speed, strength, and complete loyalty to a strict chain of command. They expected a traditional, organized battle, two armies lining up and fighting with clear objectives and predictable movements. The Krill chose a large, flat, coastal region on Earth to establish a secure landing zone, or beachhead, a place where they could build up their massive supplies. On Earth, the global defense system was a patchwork, but it had a brain that never rested. Alex worked tirelessly, using every bit of data he had collected from the crippled Whisper probe and the retreating Vigilance to guess the Krill's exact landing spots and protocols. Chloe worked beside him, her focus unbreakable. She had been able to salvage small fragments of the Whisper's energy core and use them to create tiny, powerful jammers. These devices were cheap and simple, designed specifically to interrupt the precise, synchronized radio communication that Krill troops relied on for movement and targeting. The Krill forces descended, confident in their numbers and superior armor, but they were not met by an army lined up in a field. They were met by shadows. The human resistance was not organized into large battalions. It was scattered into small, vicious teams fighting on their home turf. They called this style of fighting guerrilla warfare. The Krill were predictable. They always followed the most logical, straight path to their target, moving in large, efficient columns. The humans knew this and used it against them. Jane, a former engineer who had quickly become a local militia leader, used the old sewers and maintenance tunnels beneath a small town to launch attacks from below. Her teams would hit the weak points in the Krill armor, often the back of the knee joints, and then disappear before the Krill could even aim their weapons. They used noise and confusion as weapons, setting off multiple small explosions far away from the actual attack to distract the rigid Krill forces. The Krill soldiers began to report strange, unsettling things. They were used to fighting enemies who were afraid, who ran, or who surrendered when the fight became hopeless. Humans did none of those things. The Krill found themselves fighting against people who used common items, shovels, tools, even simple ropes, as makeshift weapons and traps. The Krill protocols for capturing enemy leaders were useless because every human seemed ready to die for the person next to them or for what seemed like no reason at all. Captain Clar, who had moved from the scouting ship to oversee the ground campaign, watched the data streams with growing horror. The Krill had taken only 3 square miles of ground in the first day. They were losing more soldiers to hidden traps and desperate close-range attacks than they had lost in entire organized compliance phases on other planets. Captain Clar watched one particular combat video feed from a drone. A squad of Krill soldiers was trying to clear a heavily damaged apartment block. A lone human fighter, pinned down and out of ammunition, instead of surrendering, simply rushed a soldier and tackled him through a broken window. Both fell 5 stories to their deaths. It was utterly reckless. It was illogical. Clar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ship. His official logs reflected his growing fear. They do not value their own lives in the way we calculate. This is a species that willingly accepts self-destruction to cause minimal damage to the enemy. This is not defense. This is a species built for war. We came prepared for an army. We found a planet that is an ecosystem of hatred and brutal love.
The coordination between Alex, Chloe, and Jane's scattered forces was flawless in its chaos. They exploited every single piece of information. They realized that Krill armor had tiny blind spots in the back of the knee joints. Within hours, almost every human team across different continents was targeting the same specific points. The Krill could not understand how the humans communicated this tactical data so fast, but they felt the deadly, relentless effect of the attacks. The Krill command realized that they were in a quagmire. They were fighting on every street, in every forest, and under every building. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, turning the predictable Krill protocols into fatal flaws. The invasion was stuck. The Krill were not losing because they lacked firepower, but because they lacked the understanding of a species that had perfected the art of fighting itself for millennia. The Krill were beginning to feel a fear of the unknown, a creeping dread of the limitless fury of a species that simply refused to be beaten. They were finding that a chaotic opponent is one you can never truly defeat, only annoy until it kills you.
The Krill invasion was a disaster. Weeks turned into a slow, costly crawl across Earth's surface. Every day, the Krill lost more soldiers to traps, messy ambushes, and the insane courage of the human resistance. The Krill High Council looked at the numbers. The cost of taking Earth was already more than the planet was worth. They could not continue fighting a species that did not follow the basic rules of survival. They needed a conclusion, a way to end the mess. The Council decided on a terrible, final action. They would initiate a massive orbital bombardment. They would sterilize the entire region around their landing zone. This would secure their beachhead, eliminate the resistance in that area, and force the remaining humans to face the raw, overwhelming power of the Krill fleet. It was a brutal act, but necessary to restore Krill order. On Earth, Alex watched the energy signatures of the Krill fleet shift. He saw the transports moving away and the massive command ship powering up its biggest weapons. "They're not moving to attack us on the ground," Alex said, his voice flat with dread. "They're going to hit the surface from orbit. We can't stop it. We don't have the shielding to fight that kind of power." Chloe, standing next to him, looked at the data showing the immense energy buildup. She knew their makeshift quantum filter and Ben's reckless fighter jets couldn't help now. The physical fight was over. "But we know their weakness," Chloe said, a spark of desperate genius in her eyes. "It's not power. It's us. It's our minds. They are afraid of what they cannot predict." They realized they could not win the war with missiles, but they could win it with information. They would give the Krill High Council exactly what they had asked for in the very beginning, a complete profile of humanity, but not the clean technical data the Krill expected. They would send the chaos. They spent their last frantic hours collecting everything. They gathered data from every corner of human existence. Thousands of videos showing people helping strangers after a disaster. Long histories of the world wars showing unbelievable cruelty and then rebuilding. Clips of human music, both beautiful and angry. Ancient books showing terrible philosophies and great love stories, and long reports on the speed of human technological progress and our constant desire for conflict. They focused all of this into one massive compressed data file. The total history of human passion, science, and terrifying self-destruction. Alex and Chloe worked together to connect this file to the same massive communications array that they had used to damage the Whisper probe in Part 2. They needed a single massive burst of energy to pierce the Krill command ship's defenses and dump the file directly into the main Krill network. "It's ready," Chloe whispered, her finger hovering over the activation button. "It's either this or we watch the world burn." Alex nodded. "Give them the full picture." The array fired, not with a weapon of force, but with a weapon of truth. It was a massive, clean spike of data energy aimed directly at the Krill command ship in high orbit. The burst penetrated the ship's hull and overloaded the Krill's logical processing systems with the terrible, illogical truth of the human spirit.
On the command bridge, Captain Klar and the Krill leaders watched as the data flooded their screens. They saw footage of humans inventing complicated cures for diseases they themselves had created. They saw images of terrible civil wars, where one human group fought another to extinction, only to weep over the ruins and build a better society from the ashes. They saw art created out of sadness and beauty found in chaos. They saw a species that fought constantly, sometimes with the galaxy, but mostly with itself. The Krill had one rule: everything must be predictable to be controlled. But this species was the definition of unpredictability. They were adaptable and resilient, yes, but they were also capable of insane acts of both good and evil, often in the same day. Captain Klar stepped forward, his cold logic suddenly shaken by psychological dread. Council, this species is not an enemy to be conquered. They are a force of nature. Their capacity for self-destruction is only matched by their will to survive. If we push them to the brink, they will not surrender. They will simply find a new, terrible way to fight us. They will spend their entire existence trying to destroy us for what we have done. The Krill High Council realized the awful truth. This species could never be integrated, never tamed, and the cost of eliminating them would be endless. The real fear was not their crude weapons, but the will of humanity. They had found a species that thrived on the brink of conflict and embraced the chaos the Krill had spent millennia avoiding. The order was given. The Krill fleet, which had never retreated from a battle, began its tactical withdrawal. Their ships, which had come with cold arrogance, left with grudging terror. As the last Krill command ship moved away into the darkness, it left behind a small, floating beacon. The beacon transmitted a single clear message in every known galactic language. Avoidance protocol enacted. This species is unstable and non-compliant. Do not engage. Alex and Chloe, tired and bruised but alive, watched the screens go blank. The war was over. The victory was not won by the size of their guns, but by the sheer, terrifying revelation of what it truly meant to be human. They had not defeated an empire, they had simply scared it away by showing it the mirror.